Good afternoon, everybody. After the wonderful morning panel, so wonderful having so much family in the room right now. We are live streaming for our second session, so we'll have both in person and live streaming. I just want to tell you, there were a lot of descendants who were on the live stream as well. So that was very cool. A lot of great comments. They may not have been asking you questions. They were making a lot of comments, and they were in awe of what they heard. I want everybody to know that. For those of you who are joining the live stream for the first time, my name is Nancy Easterling. It's my honor to serve as the Executive Director of Historic Sotterley. And if, in case you are joining for the first time, I do want to talk about our sponsors, the Maryland Humanities, Maryland Heritage Area Authority, and our wonderful Whiteford Systems in the house making all of this possible. So thank you, Brooks and Andrew, so much. The morning session was incredible. You'll all agree. I mean, you got a slice of some of the over 200 descendants that are part of our story and what's being told here. But now we're going to shift gears and we're going to hear a voice. Now, somewhere in the house is a woman named Shemika Berry. I don't see her right now. Or Shemika Renée. I don't see her right now. But her bio's in here and you can read it. Award-winning, incredible person. One of the stars of, personally, I think her greatest credit is she is one of the stars of our Living History, The Choice, which you can still watch on our YouTube channel. And you need to do that. But the person who is in the house today is Ida Bell Wells-Barnett, and she is going to be brought to life with you today. She was born in July 16, 1862 to March 25th, 1931. An American investigative journalist, educator, and early leader in the civil rights movement. She's one of the founders of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And we thought you might like to meet her. So let's welcome.
Oh God, is there no justice in this land for us? Those are words that I often think and I often feel. Most prominently after I was forcibly removed from a train, but I'll get to that story later. I was born in Mississippi. I was born a slave. My mama and daddy were slaves. My daddy's daddy was a white man, but my daddy's mother was a slave. I don't remember being a slave, mainly because the Emancipation Proclamation came through when I was about a year old. But I heard the stories from my parents. I heard the stories of how they were forced to do what nobody else would want to do. How my daddy was brought to become a carpenter's apprentice when he was 18. How he was able to live in town having, yes, you could say, the taste of being free, but not being free because he was loaned out to whoever might need him. But to hear them talk of how they grew up, but then to see the light in their eyes when they talked about being free knowing that my brothers and sisters and I would not have to live that life was indescribable. There was a visible change in their eyes from when they talked about being slaves and being free. I grew up thinking and hoping that because we didn't have to live like that life would be better. We could own our own homes and earn our own money and take care of our families. But that was not our reality. Having this color of skin still cast a pall on the face and in the eyes of those who didn't look like us. And we faced it. When I was a teenager, the yellow fever got my mom and daddy and my baby brother. I was only spared, I believe, because I was visiting my grandmother at the time. And after mom and daddy died, some of our family friends and family members wanted to split the rest of us up. And I, being the oldest, I wasn't going to stand for that. So I may have said I was a little older than I was when I applied for a teaching position. But I was determined I was going to keep my family together. My grandmother stayed with my younger siblings during the week while I was teaching, and then I would come home on the weekends and we were together. And through our grief, we found happiness. Then my grandmother had a stroke and she passed on, and a couple of my other siblings were lost. So my two younger sisters and I, we moved to Tennessee with our Aunt Fanny. Memphis. Memphis was a big change from Holly Springs, Mississippi, but more things changed and more things stay the same. And I saw how the differences in our schools from the white schools were, how we didn't have the things that I could hear were available to the white schools. And it made me angry. It bothered me. It wasn't right. We had the same blood, same skin, although ours was darker. It wasn't right that we didn't have. So I wanted to make changes. And as time went on and I've started to find my voice, I started to write the thoughts that were swimming in my head down. Folks didn't like that too much. I started noticing how our Black men were unjustly accused. They were poor, blind Samsons who were sometimes led astray by white Delilahs. And when it suited those Delilahs and they were confronted with their actions, they cried and they feigned victim. And so our Samsons were attacked and our Samsons were killed. I remember there was this one family, the Mosses, they were my heart, and they had opened up their own grocery store, which was right across the street from a white grocery store. And well, the white grocers didn't take kindly to the competition. There was an altercation between some young boys who were playing marbles, and they had started getting into a little squabble. And so the little white boy's father came outside and began to thrash upon the little black boy. And then there was just a whole brawl. And in the next few days, there was more and more anger that was brewing in the neighborhood and brewing within the city. And then one night, they arrested some of the Black men for causing a disturbance, when all they were trying to do was defend the grocery store and defend this little boy. And in the middle of the night, while these men were in jail, a group of white townsmen came in and took them out and killed them. We thought freedom would bring freedom, but it didn't. It brought more pain. It brought suffering. It brought lynching. Even as I was able to provide a little better for myself and for my family, and even bought a first-class ticket on a train, color of my skin, that didn't matter. And the conductor, I'd seen my ticket, wanted me to go sit in the back cart, smoking section. It was already overcrowded, and I had paid my good money for the first class seat. And I refused to give up my seat. And so they forcibly removed me from the train. You think that stopped me? Oh no. I sued them. And I won. And I was awarded $500. But then, of course, they took it to a higher court and it was rescinded. And I tried again, but then the railroad paid off my Black lawyer. So I hired a white one. Still didn't do much good, because I still lost, but it just started a fire in me that made me cry out, "Oh God, is there no justice in this land for us?" Though I couldn't find justice, I did find love, and I found happiness. And Ferdinand was an attorney who had like thoughts. He was also a journalist. And it was unusual in that time for a husband and a wife to be able to work so closely together and share similar ideals, but he was who I needed in my life. We started a family, and I continued on with my work. I wasn't the typical housewife, you could say. Though there were some in the community who questioned my commitment. I remember hearing once that Susan B. Anthony said that I seemed distracted because I was a mother as well as being an activist. Sometimes you just have to take your baby on the road along with you. But as I continued to write and express my thoughts and my feelings about the injustices that were happening to my community, I gained some admirers. Frederick Douglass would send me notes that were very encouraging. But then there were others who thought I was a troublemaker. Well, I suppose I was to them. But I knew in my heart that the way life was for our people had to get better. And I knew that it was my calling to ensure that it continued to get better. If I had to go to the highest hilltop and shout it out, or go down to my printing press and print it out. Maybe that's why they came in and destroyed all of my work and smashed up my printing press. But as long as I had fingers to write, I was going to write. Now, I was involved with starting up the NAACP. Now, some would have you to believe that when they wrote down the charter that I chose not to have my name included. W.E.B. Du Bois deliberately kept my name off of it, but that's a story for another time. I do remember one of my proudest moments, although it was frightening. It was right around the time of President Woodrow Wilson's inauguration. They were planning a march, suffragist march. And the women that I was a part of working with in Illinois, they all wanted to go down to DC and be a part of this march. And we planned and we made our way down there. And then as we were getting ready to set up, I was approached by one of the Illinois delegates who said that they wanted the Illinois representation to be all white and that the rest of us could go and join the color delegates in the back. And while some of my sisters did go towards the back, well, me being the troublemaker that I am, I decided that's not how I was going to participate in the march. And so I politely left the group and went and stood amongst the spectators very quietly, but I knew what I was going to do. And as the various groups marched through, when I saw the head of the line of the Illinois delegate walking through, I made my way through the crowd and linked up with my sisters right in the front. They were going to remove me then. Everyone was going to see them do it. Of course, they did not. I think they knew better. My parents instilled in me pride in who I am and in my people. My parents overcame many hardships and did what they could to create a better life for my siblings and I. And though I didn't have much time on this earth with them, my goal and my job was to continue to spread the legacy that they had left for me, to pass it on to my children and my children's children and whatever children that they have beyond that. I had been given the talent to write. I had been given a fiery temperament to not back down. I had been given the spirit of compassion, but determination. So I wrote, and I wrote, and I wrote. And I hope that you have read across some of my writings. And if you haven't, I encourage you to look them up. But I would like to charge all of you with this thought. I, the daughter of slaves, born into slavery, receiving my freedom when I was just a mere babe, used my voice, my talent, my fire, the legacy of my ancestors to write and to alert people to the horrible atrocities that were continuing to happen to my community, to write down the terrible lynchings and injustices that were placed upon the Black men within our community. If I could do that from the humble beginnings that I had, and help start an organization like the NAACP and have my voice heard around the world, what can you do? What differences can you make? What legacy was born into you? What stories are in your family that need to be told? Can you write? Do you have a platform where you can spread your voice and spread your message? I challenge you to really see deep within yourself and see the differences that you can make within your community and beyond, and the generations that come after you. I am Ida B. Wells. Thank you.
Now, does anybody have a question for Ida or Shemika? Maybe either one. Anybody have a question? Jan, if you can stand up and introduce yourself. Yes, sorry.
Hi, no. Hi, I'm Jan Briscoe. And I didn't know that, Ida, you were a writer.
Yes.
Of course, I know of you, but did not know that. Where might we find your writings? Is it easy to find them?
They are easy to find. I've written pamphlets. I was a journalist for a while. And if you just go into a digital library of sorts and type in Ida B. Wells or Ida B. Wells-Barnett, you can see a list of the writings that I have contributed to and the various pamphlets. And I also wrote an autobiography that sadly was published posthumously and edited by my daughter.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jerome Spears. You said that you could tell us that story another day about W.E.B. Du Bois or Du Bois and why he left you off of the credits for the NAACP. Is this a good time to expand on that?
Well, Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, they both had different thoughts than I did. We had a like goal, but me being a woman, I was too loud and too vocal for them. And so I was too radical. Even when I ran for certain offices, I lost to Mary McLeod Bethune because she was more conservative and not as radical as I was. And because they had differences of opinion with how I carried myself and the things that I wrote down and calling out things that I saw as I saw them, they decided to leave me off of the chapter. No disrespect to those two wonderful, great men, but jealousy is a terrible thing. Yes, that part.
Oh, so was this the Niagara movement?
It was the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Yes, the actual NAACP, the national organization. Yes.
Well, yeah, they met in Niagara Falls to form the organization.
Right, but it was the actual national organization that they wanted to leave my name off of the chapter, off of the charter, not the chapter.
Not surprised.
Neither was I, but you all know now that I was a part of it.
Anybody else?
And I'm happy to ask questions as Shemika as well.
And Trudy, let me come over to you, please. Yeah.
On the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, there is a picture in existence of the founders. Have you seen that at perhaps the National Museum of African American History and Culture? I'm just wondering, all of the people who were involved with that were in that picture except Ida B. Wells. Where was she when that picture was taken, or do you know?
I actually don't know, but that is a very good question, and now I have to research it.
Just to follow up, did it actually give her name but say not pictured, or she just didn't exist in that? It didn't exist at all. She didn't exist at all. Thank you.
Well, I wanted to at first ask you a couple of questions.
Mhm.
First, how do you pick and research who? I'm talking to Shemika now. Sorry, I just switched characters. Sorry, I'm going to my buddy Shemika now.
And I am a character.
So how do you research and find out? Because it's really, for those of you who haven't ever tried this, not only is acting difficult, but being first person interpretation is extraordinarily difficult, staying in character. She does this at Akakeek, by the way, and it's extraordinary. So how do you really research and pick your characters?
That's a very good question, Nancy. It really depends on the situation. If I'm going to a school versus a presentation like this, where I'm given the theme. And when I had the conversation with Jeannie about this, I wanted to know, well, what is your theme? Do you want me to portray the woman that I portray at the Akakeek Foundation? Do you want me to portray a ancestor from Sotterley? And the guidance that was given was that somebody that was influential, someone who had a link to slavery, but maybe was not enslaved their entire life. Someone who was able to transcend the circumstances that they were born into and to make a difference within their community. And so I started looking up women within this particular time period, someone who could have been born into slavery, but either ran away and got their freedom, or was given their freedom through the Emancipation Proclamation, or through the passing of their owners and was emancipated that way. And came upon Ida B. Wells, who I've done many historical women. I have an arsenal of over 20, but I had never done Ida B. Wells. So it was an interesting challenge. What I do for the research is I find the time period of their life that I want to visually represent. So I didn't want to do Ida B. Wells in the 1930s when she would have been much older. I wanted to do middle-aged, the age bracket that I am in. And that helps me to determine what would she have worn. I look at pictures of her, if I can, or whoever the historical figure is, if I can only get maybe a headshot version, then I will determine how old they may have been in the photo, and then research what does the fashion look like of that time period based upon their economic standing. What would they have been able to afford to wear? And then I go through and I try to find interesting tidbits that maybe people don't necessarily know. Some people may have known that she was a journalist, but didn't know that she was involved with the founding of the NAACP. And I have a lot of different facts and dates and names that are bouncing around in my head. And when I first started doing first person interpretation, I was very nervous doing the presentations because I felt like I have to say every single date. I have to say every single name of every single person that popped up in the research. But then as I started to relax more and started to interact more with the various audiences, I wanted to make the person more human and not a litany of timelined events. Anybody can look up a timeline and see what date this happened and this happened and this happened and the birth date and the death date. But I started to think about if I was actually that historical figure, and somebody asked me about something in my life, how would I tell them that story? How do I, as Shemika, relay a story that happened to me in my youth or when I was in my early 20s? I'm not going to say in the year 1998. That's false. Nobody does that. But I would say when I was in college, and then I would go on with the story. And so that thought process is how I transform all of the dates and the people and the circumstances and the places and condense it into a story type form so that it humanizes the historical person. If I were to be Harriet Tubman and just give off dates and times and people, it sounds like a history lesson. And some people will engage with that. That is how some people learn, but you're not going to get third, fourth, and fifth graders by giving off a history lesson like that. Just brought them to me for a field trip because they're not reaching them through the history lesson, but putting on the costume, changing my hair, becoming that person and telling their story as if I've lived it adds a connection, and it humanizes the person. It pulls them from the page of the history book or the encyclopedia. An encyclopedia is a group of books that has facts in it. I know, like, in case we have younger people who are like, what's an encyclopedia, Mom? But it takes them from text and it embodies the person. It brings them back to life for that moment and makes them real. And then you realize they had thoughts and feelings and grief and happiness and contentment and anger and passion the same way we do.
So, Miss Ida, tell me more about your personal life. So I'm very interested in knowing more about your husband and how he supported you, not necessarily financially, but in your work, and what was the dynamic? What is the dynamic of your household?
Well, the dynamic of my household is chaotic. With 6 children running around, it can be very challenging. As I said, I would go on the road and I would take them with me if I needed to as a young mother, which causes stress for others, but that's my business and not theirs, or the other way around. But Ferdinand, by him being so open-minded, and I'm certain with some of the challenges that he faced being a Black professional man in this time period, he seemed to be excited to find a wife who didn't want to just be in the house. Just as he supported me, I supported him. Our writings were similar. How we thought was similar. I mean, can you imagine the debates that we had over washing dishes? And but he was what I needed. He was the type of man that I needed to be able to know that I had his support. I couldn't have gone to Britain to do some of the work that I did and give some of the speeches that I gave without having his support of allowing me to go. And I know people don't like that term, he allowed you to go. Early 1900s, he allowed me to go. We had 6 small children in the house. But Ferdinand wasn't the type of man that would just want someone who was just at home. He wanted someone that challenged him the same way that he was able to challenge me. If I did not have him as my husband, who was so supportive, I wouldn't be standing before you today talking about my work with the NAACP, my work as a journalist, my work as a suffragist, breaking through literal color lines to march with my fellow sisters and suffragists.
So Miss Ida, what is, do you have, what is your faith? Do you have a faith and your beliefs, and how does that fit in? And how did that fit in with those you fellowship with?
So faith is, I am of the Methodist denomination. My father, before he passed away, was actually a trustee of a college, of Shaw College, and then they changed the name to Rust College. And I was able to go there and get my degree, and it was founded by the Methodist Church as well. So having that fellowship, that community, that camaraderie, that faith, that no matter what was going to befall me and that I was going to face, I had my church family back home praying for me. Even if they didn't fully understand what I was doing and what my goals were, they knew that my heart was with the community. And if their families were victims to some of the lynching, they knew that I was going to draw attention to it and that I was going to do what I could to bring justice for their family members, or to at least write their names down and have their names said and have their names remembered, and that they would not have just had their lives snuffed out and nobody ever know who they were. So it's a very familial, faith-based community that gives me the support that I need to do the work that I do.
Ms. Barnett, Mrs. Barnett, I know you have told us that you've faced discrimination and the like because of the era. Did your family personally face danger, you and your husband, for your stance?
There's always danger around and abounding, and I'm certain that his businesses suffered. I'm certain that there were many clients who did not want to have him as a lawyer because associating with us could have been detrimental for someone else. Even though I was well known, doesn't mean I was well liked. Even if I was well respected by people who were greatly admired within the African American community, Frederick Douglass, doesn't mean that everybody liked me. Boy. But even though it may have affected us financially and business-wise, printing presses were destroyed, which really put a damper on publishing newspapers. We knew that we still needed to go forward. Having those adversities and those challenges befall us let me know that I was on the right track and that I was on the right course. If I wasn't making noise, nobody would care what I was doing. If I was just a housewife tending to my children at home and not being a radical, I don't know if our lives would have been easier. I know that the success of the future generations may have been affected, and it may have taken longer for certain rights to finally come our way had I not been involved. Am I solely the reason why women and Black women were given the right to vote? No. But I do know that I had a hand in it, and I'm grateful for my place in history, even at the cost.
Diane Davies. You were a visionary. You were a very strong woman. And I believe from things I've read about you and things that you've written, had you not documented some of the things that you saw and experienced, we probably wouldn't even know about them at this point in time. But was there anything that surprised you when you did your research about Ida Mae Wells? I switched per characters, I'm sorry.
That's quite all right. What surprised me was I did not realize how deeply involved she was with writing about the lynchings. I knew she had been a journalist. She was on one of the many posters that I saw growing up as a child during Black History Month that came out just in February, and then in March, where'd the poster go? I don't know. And it basically just said journalist. Some of them may have said suffragist. It's been a while, I don't remember. But I did not realize that she wrote as much as she did about the lynchings, that she had the firsthand knowledge of this family that owned a grocery store called the People's Grocery. And it was right across the street from a white grocer, and they did not like the competition at all. And a number of men were lynched because of it, because of a fight between two children. And as I prepared to do this historical figure, I tried not to dwell too much on what she could have seen, because it's already a challenge to put on these garments and to say these words. It's the year 2022. I am originally from Louisiana. I had perhaps the rare honor that I actually grew up for about 15 years of my life knowing my great-grandparents. And even just a few years ago, I learned that my great-grandfather was beaten by the police. He survived it, but there was an article in the newspaper that one of my father's cousins posted on Facebook, and I've got a copy of it. And to read the account, my great-grandfather was just walking across the street. And this was in South Louisiana, and he was more fair than I am. And he was attacked, and he was beaten. And they referenced him as the Negro. The Negro was crossing the street and made whatever comment, which he did not. The Negro did this, and the Negro was beaten. And there's a photo of my great-grandfather in his 40s, perhaps, with a broken, bloody nose and bruises. My great-grandfather was lynched just for being a Black man. And I was born in the 70s, and I knew my great-grandfather, and that story never came out the whole time talking to him. But I found this out from another family member, and it broke my heart. My great-grandfather's name was Paul Demichet. He was not the Negro. He had a name. He had a family. He had children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren. And so preparing historical figures and preparing for this presentation and knowing that the woman that I'm portraying wrote about the very lynchings that befell members of my family. And my grandfather was fortunate to survive it. Many families can't say that about their relatives who were lynched. And those are the types of things that I think about and that surprised me, because whenever I pick a historical figure, I try to find something about that person that I can relate to, something about their life that is in my life that I can, I understand that, I connect with that. I've done Elizabeth Keckley, who was the seamstress for Mary Todd Lincoln. I'm a costumer, so I have that connection with her. I thought my connection to studying about Ida B. Wells was going to be the fact that she was a journalist, and there was a time in my life when I was younger that I thought I wanted to be a journalist. I was going to go on CNN. No. But the connection was the lynchings and the way she wrote about them to bring attention to them, and knowing that I have an ancestor who survived one.
This is a Shemika question.
Okay, those are easier.
Yeah. So, you're a very familiar face around here at Sotterley.
I am.
Yeah. I know I've seen you perform here various times. Like, I believe you were in The Choice about the War of 1812 story that happened here. Do you have like maybe one character you've played here that's particularly memorable for you?
Oh, well, you might think that I'm going to say Elsie from The Choice, but I'm not. And if I say the name wrong, Nancy, please correct me. I believe Ruth Barber. Okay. So I think it was my first Christmas Sotterley tour. And I was cast in the 1950s era. We were in the dining room. And I was going to portray Ruth Barber. And she was a domestic in that time frame. And the presentation that I was to give, I just specifically remember talking about, she had 11 children. It's been about, 12 years since I've done that one. But that she specifically mentioned her youngest child, who was about 11 months old, I think, at the timing of this presentation. And we had been prepared that there were people who were connected to Sotterley who were going to be coming in and out. And there was no telling who from the board or what visitors were going to be coming through. But we were alerted that there were possibly people who were going to come through who either had knowledge of firsthand or through family stories of some of the people we were portraying, because we were all portraying actual people who were connected to Sotterley. And at the end of the tour, one of the tours, Nancy pulled me to the side and said that, okay, I'm trying not to get emotional, that the baby that I referenced as an adult had come through the tour and saw me portray his mother. And that his comment to Nancy was that I was the physical embodiment of his mother. And I had never met her. I just memorized the script that was given. And that was the most special things that somebody could say to me or say about me or about my performance, because it showed me that I was on the right track. My goal always, when I embody anybody for a historical reenactment, performance, interpretation, whatever your choice of words, is that I show their humanity and that people who see the presentation see the person that I am trying to bring to life. The person whose story that I want to tell. I don't want it to seem like I've memorized a bunch of facts and figures and just regurgitated them for an audience, but that you can suspend disbelief for a moment that I'm Ida B. Wells, that I was Elsie, that I'm Kate Sharper, that I'm Harriet Tubman, that I'm Ruth Barber. And to get that affirmation and confirmation from her son meant the world to me. So thank you for the question, but that was the most memorable experience that I've had here.
Questions? Well,
Just
nope.
question
I'll be right back for you, Lynn. Catherine, did you have one online? So let's go to an online question.
Yes, we have a question from Elena following up with the anti-lynching. This is for Ida or Shemika or whoever wants to answer. She says, what do you think Ms. Wells would think of the Anti-Lynching Law Act finally coming to fruition after 100+ years? So in 2020, Congress passed the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Law Act, and she wants to know what you think Ida would say about that.
It's about time.
Amen.
And perhaps she would say, oh God, there is justice in this land for us. Thank you for the question.
Hi, I'm Lynn Petrell. Going back, and I'm talking to Shemika now. You coupled it so easily when questions came to you about the relationship between Ida B. Wells and Ferdinand. Did you have to do much research on Ferdinand so that you could answer that easily?
Actually, no. That answer came from the sheer fact that it was the early 1900s. They got married in 1895. For her to be able to do what she did, to have the influence and the impact that she had, he had to have been supportive. They were married until her death in 1931. He died in 1936. So for them to be married for that length of time and her to be as radical and as well known as she was, my imagination is that he would have had to have been very loving and supportive. There were some of what I did for the research. I did see that there were comments from her daughter that said that they had an unconventional relationship compared to other married couples because they worked together, they wrote together, they were very like-minded. And so I just feel that no marriage is perfect, no relationship is perfect, but they were perfect for each other. And it seems evident with the time period and the work that she did that he was supportive.
I am wondering, listening to you, if there were contemporaries that you could name who were of like mind, other women of that era, and who they were, if you know of any.
I know that, like I said, she was beaten by Mary McLeod Bethune for a particular office. The title is escaping me at the moment. She did know Susan B. Anthony. She was connected with Belle Squire and Virginia, her name is escaping me as well. They were part of the Illinois delegates that were working together for that particular march. She did correspond with Frederick Douglass as well. So she had, there were a lot of, famous names that she encountered that we're familiar with, that just reading those names, knowing that she worked with Marcus Garvey and Madam C.J. Walker, just to see all those names together, we are so used to compartmentalizing history. And it's like Madam C.J. Walker was working with hair care. She did not create the first straightening comb. That was a white man in Paris. A Black woman would not have done that to another Black woman. If you've ever had your ear burned, you know that that is the truth. But we compartmentalize Madam C.J. Walker with just hair care. We don't think about her being an activist. We don't think about her knowing Ida B. Wells. We think about Frederick Douglass. I didn't even think about him living in the same time period as Ida B. Wells for him to even encourage her. But that is what doing this type of work does. It takes history out of the compartments that we've placed it in, and it puts it in a book, and it has pages. Did you know that, let me see if I get this right. Harriet Tubman and Ronald Reagan were alive at the same time. When Harriet Tubman died, Ronald Reagan was 2 years old. So it was at the end of her life and the beginning of his, but they were alive at the same time. Anne Frank and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. were born the same year. But we don't think about that. She didn't get to live past 14. He didn't get to make it to 40, but both of them should only be 2 or 3 years younger than Queen Elizabeth. Because we compartmentalize history. And doing this work and the research helps me put those connections together that I never realized that we weren't taught in school. History is taught mathematically in school. What year did it happen? How much land was affected? How many people were killed? How much money did they earn? But if we talked about the relationships between people, it would make history more interesting. I'm very honored and glad that my children think I have the coolest job in the world. They are 22, 17, and 15, and they have all historically interpreted with me. And they enjoy it and they love it. When I go to their schools, I actually ask my kids, is it okay if I come to your school? And they say, yes, Mom, our friends, our classmates think it's great. Nobody ever teases them. They think it's amazing. They think it's wonderful. So I was able to catch some of the panel this morning, which was amazing. The younger generations are awake. And they are on fire for justice and equality for everyone. Just keep talking to them. Keep opening opportunities for them to learn. Bring history to them in a different way, in a way that is going to excite them or make them interested. They may not want to go to a lecture, but they'll go to a play. They'll watch a performance and they can learn something from there. Going to the schools, elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, colleges, going to the theater departments and letting young people know, you like history, you like dressing up, I got a career for you. But if you get them young, they're there. Their heart is there. I was sharing with somebody that as young as 8 years old for me, my first book report I did on Little House on the Prairie. And I asked my teacher, can I dress up like her? And she said, yes, Shemika, if you want to. And I ran home, Mom, you have to make me a costume. And she did. When I was in the 4th grade, I had to do a presentation for Black History Month. My mother told me about Shirley Chisholm. My mind was blown. A Black woman ran for president in the 70s? I couldn't believe it. So I portrayed Shirley Chisholm. When I was in the 8th grade, I portrayed Phyllis Wheatley for the first time. So there are children, there are young people who have this in them, who have this calling in them. It's just finding them and cultivating it. But the next generations to continue telling these stories is out there.
Thank you for being here today.
You're welcome. Thank you
Very
for having me.
Anybody else?
We knew about the lynchings because of the Black newspapers, and here in the Baltimore, D.C. metro area, it was always the African American newspaper. If I recall right, I think the last lynching they reported on was about a Black man who was lynched on the Eastern Shore back in 1937. What was the name of the Black newspaper in Chicago that Ms. Wells was I want to say defender. Does that sound right?
That sounds right.
Yeah.
But like I said, I have a lot of information that is running around in my head.
Yeah.
Like, you didn't say that, you didn't say that. But I think that does sound familiar. But she worked with so many different newspapers and wrote so many different pamphlets. But yeah, it was, I think it was a defender. Thank you. So you should have come up here and helped me and coached me.
I did want to ask you, she mentioned, of course, Elsie and the Choice. Now, who here has seen The Choice? Okay, go on YouTube when you get home and watch on our channel and watch this amazing woman and others in The Choice. But in that, of course, Elsie is portraying somebody who is enslaved here at Sotterley. And I know you have portrayed other people who have been enslaved. And I have to tell you the grace with which she handled some of the questions from the audience, because there were 3 scenes, and I just want to set this for you. They had one scene in the manor house, one scene in the slave cabin, and then one scene on the front. And all scenes were wonderful. The most powerful one was the one in the slave cabin. It really was riveting. And we were in there with them in this tiny space. We were in there with them. And I don't think it was until year 2 or 3 that we did this, that you got the question from the young lady. And I wanted to know if you could talk about that question. I don't know if you'd ever gotten it before, but I wanted to talk about how you answer that and why you do it.
So I think it was about the second or third year, and we opened the questions up to the audience. And there was an African-American family standing off to the side, and there was a 16-year-old girl, and she raised her hand. And the minute she raised her hand, I knew whatever question she was going to ask was coming to me. I just knew. And her question was, why would you, me, as a free Black woman in the 2000s, want to portray somebody who was enslaved? And she didn't even use the term enslaved. She just said, why would you want to play a slave? And I had not gotten that question in that type of forum before, but I have gotten it from the African-American community, from the African-American theater community. I often get we have so many other stories to tell. Why are you being a slave? There are so many other roles that you can take. Why are you being a slave? Or I would want to do whatever other role, but I'm tired of playing a maid and I'm tired of playing a slave. So I had heard those questions before, but there was so much hurt and confusion in her question. I could tell she had been brought against her will to the tour, that her family wanted her to see it, or the parents wanted to do it, and the kids were just kind of like, why are we here? And that was almost her body language, when, why do you want to play a slave? And so I told her that our ancestors deserve to have their names said, and they deserve to have their stories told, that slavery was bad, but the people who were slaves were not bad for being enslaved. It was done to them. And just like you may have a family member who goes through a hard time, you don't stop talking about that family member because they've gone through a hard time. You still love them. They're still a part of your family. They still exist, and they deserve to be mentioned and loved and cared about. Same with our ancestors. And her countenance changed. Like, she had never been told that before. She had never heard it put in those terms before. And I didn't have a lot of time to dwell on the answer. It was like, boom, boom. But the more I spoke, the more I understood why it's always been a part of me to do this work, why I've always been drawn to it. Because for some of our sites, Sotterley, Akakik Foundation, the only people who will ever hear Elsie's name is someone who comes here or sees the video of the choice. The only people who will ever hear Kate Sharper's name are the people who go to the Akakik Foundation and hear me say her name. Everybody knows Harriet Tubman's name. Lots of people know Ida Bell Wells' name because they're in the history books, because they made a significant contribution to history, significant enough that somebody felt they should write it down. But what about our great, 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 great grandmothers, aunts, cousins, nieces, sisters, daughters, who didn't make a historical contribution to this nation? Do their names not deserve to be said? Their names still deserve to be said. If we know their name, we should say their names. And if we don't know their names, but we know their stories, we should tell their stories because we are their legacy. I can stand here and put on this costume and be Ida B. Wells because she was. I can be at the Accokeek Foundation. I can be here and I can put on the garments and I can be Elsie. I can be Kate Sharper. The difference is I have the privilege to take those vestments off and to go back into my modern clothing and get into my modern vehicle and drive to my home. They didn't have that option. They didn't have that choice, that luxury. They had to be out there pulling off hornworms and doing laundry and tending to children and watching their family members run away to freedom or decide if they were going to stay or leave. I have the choice to tell their stories. And I consider it a great honor and a humbling privilege. And is it hard? Yes. Is it trauma-filled? Yes. Do I cry a lot? Yes. But I do it to honor them. And so that they're not forgotten, that their trials and tribulations are not ignored and are not sugar-coated or washed away as if they never existed. They lived, they breathed, they walked, they suffered. And we should remember them and honor them.
Back to Ida B. Wells. Frederick Douglass was an extraordinary writer, just remarkable. Published newspapers, published books, just so remarkable. Ida, did Frederick Douglass particularly influence you about your writing?
I don't know how much he influenced my style of writing. I will say that he influenced me with his support of what I was doing and how I was doing it. Not that I needed his validation, but knowing that you have someone in your corner is very encouraging. And at moments where perhaps I was at my lowest and felt like I should give up and I shouldn't keep doing this, and what is the point? Having those notes sent to me, having the words that he said to me and about me, let me know that I am on the right track and somebody notices and somebody has my back. Thank you.
Just one final question, unless somebody else has one, we'll keep going if you have one. You mentioned that, well, the grace with which you handle this, but when people are coming to a performance like this, they kind of know what they're going to be expecting. They may not when they come to Accokeek. They may not know they're going to have a living history performer. Tell us about some of the interactions that you encounter when you are in character.
I could probably, at least, if not write a book, write at least a pamphlet or a really long essay. So there have been times pre-COVID, we would have weekend interpretation where I would be dressed as Kate Sharper, who was actually enslaved in the Prince George's County area in 1770 timeframe. I've had African-American families walk on site, see me in costume, look me dead in my face, whisper to each other, turn around, and walk off site. I have had older Caucasian couples walk on site with their clearly biracial grandchildren, and the look in their eyes without them saying a word to me is, please don't say anything around my grandbaby that I'm going to have to explain that in your time period, I would have owned one of their parents. And so in those situations, I just say, welcome to the Bolton Farm. I'm Kate Sharper. If you have any questions, I'll be around. Feel free to ask me anything. And there's this look of relief on their face. And they're like, oh, thank you. And then they scurry off with the children to go look at the lambs or the sheep or the cows. I had one Caucasian lady come through with her little girl. Her name was Emma. I called her Princess Emma because she had a tiara on and she was wearing a really cute little pink tutu. And her mother asked me to explain slavery to her daughter in a way that she could understand. And so I squatted down because finally I was actually talking to somebody shorter than me. And I got down on her level and I asked her what her name was. And she told me. She was all excited. And I said, who is this? And she said, my mommy. I said, who do you live with? And she said, mommy and daddy. And I said, you're wearing a really pretty dress. Who got that for you? She said, mommy and daddy did. I said, oh, do they work? And she said, yes. I said, so the money that they earned from working, they bought that really pretty dress for you. And she said, yes. And I said, oh, I'm sure you have wonderful food at home. And she was all excited. And I said, do you know what a slave is? And she said, no. And I said, well, I'm dressed as somebody who was a slave. But I was very clear to her because she was so young. I let her know that I was pretending to be someone who really did go through this way before her great grandparents were even born. So she understood that I was acting. And I said, but a slave is somebody who has to get up before the sun is up. They have to tend to all the things that are growing. So you see all the animals, they have to tend to the animals. They have to do the laundry and the cooking and the cleaning and pulling off terrible caterpillars off of plants and sometimes tending to the children, but they don't get paid. And she said, they don't? And I said, no. I said, and if they don't feel well, they can't say, I don't feel well. I'm sorry, I'm not coming in today. They still have to get up and still have to do everything that is required of them, but they don't get paid and they can't leave without permission. And sometimes their family members are taken away so that they can work for other people without getting paid. And this 7-year-old little girl said, that's not fair. I said, you're right, sweetie. It's not fair. And that's why they passed laws so that that doesn't happen anymore. But we dress like this and we tell these stories so that we don't forget. And she said, I'm happy to meet you. And I said, I'm happy to meet you too. So those are some of the experiences I've had. I've had rewarding experiences. I've had hurtful experiences. But the hurtful ones weren't malicious towards me. And I don't get angry at the visitors who leave. I've never had anybody say anything derogatory towards me. I do on occasion, well, more than occasion, for the school tours, when the children come through the barn, the tobacco barn, and they encounter me dressed as Kate Sharper, I will get comments like, is that Harriet Tubman? Because that's the only African-American woman that they've heard of that's been enslaved. And I always have to say, I know not of this Harriet that you speak of. Perhaps she has not been born yet. And then they realize, oh, 1770s, right. Sometimes I get, you're creepy, because I'm in a barn and I'm wearing old clothes. Sometimes I get, oh, she's pretty, which tells me that they heard they might meet a woman who was enslaved, but they go in with the idea of she's going to be ugly, she's going to be scary, she's going to be old. So they're not being taught that people who are enslaved are people that are having this done to them. They're being taught about a slave that's scary and terrible and horrible. And that's not what needs to be taught. They need to be taught that people who were enslaved were people who were enslaved. In this country, so much emphasis is placed on how good master is. When you buy a house, they want to show you the master bedroom. When you graduate from college with your bachelor's degree, they want to know, where are you going to go get your master's? I was in the military for 5.5 years. There are ranks within the military that are extremely problematic. I was in the Air Force. My dad was in the Air Force. My uncle was in the Air Force. I love the Air Force. But their highest enlisted rank is problematic in the very title of it. Chief Master Sergeant. There's so much wrong in that entire title. It's appropriation and it's oppression. But it's something to aspire to. Those are the type of experiences that I have with the work that I do at the Acton Foundation and other places. We as a nation have to get past and work through our generational shame and generational guilt. And that is why I get some of the reactions that I get where people walk on site. And it's not just African-American families. There are Caucasian families that come on site that don't want to talk about it and turn around and walk off. I've had Japanese tourists come in and have to try to explain to them why I'm dressed the way I'm dressed. And they don't speak much English, and I certainly don't speak Japanese. But through Google Translate and my phone, I'm able to get the message to them, and they're surprised. There have been schools where there have been new students that have come through that were from another country that had never heard about slavery in America. So not only did they not know what they were going to be getting themselves into, but when they meet me and I'm saying these words and they're being translated by their friends, they think it's real time, that I'm actually, truly, presently enslaved. So then I have to explain to their friend, make sure you let them know it's a secret, that I'm acting, without ruining it for the rest of the students who already know, but we don't want to break that illusion. So it's a very interesting work. And first-person interpreters, African-American interpreters, and Caucasian interpreters need to support each other and understand that there's trauma on both sides. Just as it's difficult for me to say, I'm a slave and they sold away my son, it's difficult for my Caucasian friend who's standing next to me to say, I sold away her son, when they don't have those feelings and those thoughts. The history is ugly, but it needs to be told.
Well, just as earlier, you heard our descendants giving voice. Our descendants were talking about their feelings, their experiences, their histories. So much of what we are striving to do today here at Sotterley and so many other places are trying to give voice to those who didn't have a voice. And we are so honored that Shemika is here today giving voice to not only famous people that you may not have thought about in the way that she brings them to life, but as you mentioned, giving voice to those who maybe aren't remembered otherwise, because our ancestors deserve that. And all aspects of our history need to be told and understood, even when it's not easy. And I know very often for you, it is not easy. It's like having a trauma every time you're going and putting on that costume very often. But we are so honored. Thank you so much. Round of applause for both Ida and Shemika. So this is going to be the end of day one. Tomorrow, Mr. Jerome is going to kick us off in the morning, and then we're going to have Travis Mitchell. So I hope you are joining us back. For those who are online, come back and join us tomorrow. But thank you all for sharing this very special day with us. It has been just an absolute pleasure. And Shemika's family too, always will be. Thank you so much, honey.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, and our descendants, don't leave. There's a reception for you. Don't forget that.